Writing this hasn't been easy. I've started and deleted it dozens of times. Every time I look at the screen, that image by the sink flashes before my eyes. That twisted thumb, those wide staring eyes, those muffled noises, and most of all, that voice. That shapeless, inhuman voice that nevertheless spoke like a man. It said to me, leave him. He belongs to another. 3 years have passed. I still hesitate to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. My eyes still involuntarily drift toward the dark corners of the room. But this fear is no longer a darkness that swallows me. It's more like the scar left behind by a defeat. Perhaps someone will read this and it will help. Perhaps a young bride will read it and notice the signs sooner. Perhaps someone who, like me, prayed for something to happen without asking if it was blessed, will read these lines and pause to think. My name is Clara and I am 27 years old. I live on the misty coast of Ireland, teaching ancient languages and theology to the local community in an old stone convent. Most of my students are women in their 70s and 80s, women whose faces have been carved by the sea wind. I love them dearly and they feel the same. Over the years, our bond grew far beyond that of a teacher and student. I've sung at their grandchildren's weddings, felt my heart ache at news of their illnesses, and stood with a bowed head under the cold rain at their funerals. Mrs. O'Shea was one of those students. She was a dignified, composed woman whose word carried weight, one of the most respected figures in the parish. Despite being much older than me, she never looked down on me. She always took me seriously. Many people loved her, and I was foremost among them. That day, the lessons had ended. Everyone had filtered out, leaving just the two of us in the stone corridors of the convent. I was tidying the heavy wooden pews when Mrs. O'Shea headed for the door. She paused and turned back. Her voice dropped. Her tone shifted. "Clara," she said, "you wouldn't be offended if I said something, would you?" I smiled. "Of course not," I replied. She waited a moment, then spoke. "I love you with all my heart, dear girl. If you would consider it, I have a son, a God-fearing, hard-working, honorable man. I see you as a perfect match for him. If your family agrees, we would like to come and call on you properly." At that moment, I didn't know what to say or where to look. I was embarrassed and flustered, yet I didn't want to refuse. I thanked her and asked for some time to think. Mrs. O'Shea laughed gently. "Think it over, child. There is no rush," she said, and left. I was 24 back then. The questions of, when are you getting married, had intensified in the village over the past year. There had been suitors, and visitors had come and gone, but nothing had ever worked out. I couldn't quite understand why, not even within myself. Was it because I didn't feel ready? Was it because I didn't like them? Or was it a nameless fear lurking deep within me? I didn't know, but I knew this. The stream of suitors that had once been so frequent had slowed to a trickle, and then stopped altogether. For over a year, no one had knocked on our door. That long silence had left a growing weight in my chest. Let's call it the feeling of being left behind. I knew it wasn't rational. 24 is far too young to be considered an old maid, but emotions rarely follow logic. The pointed looks from the villagers and their constant, "When are you getting married? Time is slipping away," only added salt to the wound. It was exactly in that suffocating, trapped state of mind that Mrs. O'Shea had approached me. I went home and told my mother. She knew the O'Shea family well. They had shared greetings at Sunday Mass and local festivals for years. Her face lit up the moment she heard. "They are a very fine family, Clara," she said. "Devout, respected and honest. I've seen Mrs. O'Shea's son Liam a few times. A polite boy with a kind face." That night, when my father returned home, the subject was broached. I waited in my room while they spoke by the fireplace. I couldn't quite make out my father's words, but I heard my mother saying, "A very good family, a perfect match for Clara." After a while, she came into my room. "Daughter, if you are willing, you have our blessing." "What do you say?" I replied. "Tell them they are welcome whenever you see fit." The next morning, I went to the convent a bit early. It was empty except for Mrs. O'Shea. I greeted her and stepped inside. We exchanged pleasantries, but she was watching me with expectant eyes. I didn't want to bring it up before she did, but she couldn't hold back for long. "Is there any news, child?" she asked. When I told her, "You are welcome to come whenever you wish," her eyes welled up. She stood and grasped my hands. "Can we come this evening?" she asked. I hadn't expected it to happen so fast, but I agreed. Mrs. O'Shea was so excited she left without even staying for the lessons. I immediately notified my family. My mother was taken aback by the speed of it. "So soon? Well, all right then," she said. We began waiting for the evening. That day felt like a year to me. Excitement, stress, curiosity, a bit of everything. I don't remember how I taught my classes or how I finished the day. After leaving the convent, I went for some quick shopping with a friend and then headed straight home. My mother and aunt were in a whirlwind of preparation. The house was buzzing with activity. In the back of my mind, a question lingered. I knew the O'Shea family was wealthy, but what kind of man was Liam? Could someone truly be both affluent and kind-hearted? In my mind, I had merged the two. I can see the superficiality of that thought now years later. But I must confess, that was who I was back then. The time arrived. There was a knock at the door. I opened it. Mrs. O'Shea and her husband stood at the front. Right behind them, holding a bouquet of wildflowers, stood someone with a slightly bashful, hesitant posture. He was avoiding eye contact. This was Liam, and he was exactly as I had expected. I showed them in, and we sat in the parlor. We asked each other questions, shy and tentative. I felt like sinking into the floor from embarrassment. Liam was no different. His cheeks were flushed, and his gaze was fixed firmly on the rug. Shyness in a man has always left a positive impression on me. He wasn't arrogant or boastful. He was a well-mannered man who knew how to carry himself. I realized that first evening that our minds would align and we could understand one another. In my head, the decision was already made. After the guests left, my mother came to my room. "What do you think of him?" she asked. Blushing slightly, I told her I found him favorable. My mother laughed and told my father. He smiled too. I couldn't sleep that night. I prayed constantly, and I noticed something. In all those prayers, I never once said, "Let it be if it is meant to be." I only said, "Let it happen." I wanted it, so I prayed for it to be so. Instead of leaving the best outcome to God, I prayed as if I had already made the decision myself. I wouldn't realize this until much later. After everything was over, the news came the next day. They were also positive. We played a bit hard to get, asking them to wait one more day. Then we gave our consent, and everything gained incredible momentum. A terrifying speed. The formal introduction, the engagement, and the wedding preparations. All of it didn't even take a month. There were only 2 weeks between the engagement and the wedding. The groom's side was incredibly hurried. It was as if they were rushing to finalize the union before some bad omen or ill fortune could interfere. We just went along with it, saying, "All right." A part of me wanted to say, "Let's get to know each other more. Let's talk a bit longer." But that voice was lost in the whirlwind of haste. During the engagement party, as we exchanged rings, I saw Liam's hands trembling. He was nervous too. Our eyes met for a second and he smiled. I smiled back. That look left a feeling in me, the feeling that he was the one. However, just before the wedding, I received a few stern warnings from the elders in my family. My mother said, "Married life is not an easy road, Clara. Be patient." One of my aunts leaned in and whispered, "Keep on the right side of your mother-in-law. A marriage begins and ends on that bridge." I listened to them all and said, "I will." Inside, the excitement of the wedding echoed above everything else. I didn't question why they were in such a hurry. Looking back, I realize I should have. But at the time, everything looked too beautiful. When your eyes are dazzled by joy, you don't see what you don't want to see. Before I knew it, I was tucked into the decorated vintage wedding car. My heart tightened as I left my father's house, but I thought it was normal. The same sorrow every bride feels. We moved into a stone house belonging to Liam, just on the outskirts of the village. It was modern, spacious, and beautiful. Everything was close to what I had dreamed of. It was like a fairy tale. The first month passed that way too. Liam wouldn't let me lift a finger in the kitchen. He took care of everything and treated me with such kindness. He would check on me every morning before work, and return in the evening with flowers or a treat. They were small gestures, but signs of great devotion. He was devoted to his family, and they to him. Mrs. O'Shea stopped by a few times a week to check on us. That sweet, dignified woman always made her presence felt as a support. We would brew tea together in the kitchen and talk about recipes. We were like any normal, happy family. I returned to my classes at the convent. My student said, "The wedding dress suited you beautifully. Clara." We laughed and embraced. Mrs. O'Shea was there, of course. Seeing her those days was a different feeling. She wasn't just a student anymore, but my mother-in-law. We smiled at each other. I thought God had answered my prayers and that my fears had been for nothing. However, in the 3rd week of our marriage, something changed in Mrs. O'Shea's demeanor. When she visited, she began asking constantly, "Is there a problem? Is everything all right? No trouble at all?" Not once, not twice. She asked maybe 5 times that day. Each time, her eyes searched my face as if she were trying to catch a secret I wasn't telling. At one point, she took my hand, looked at me and asked, "You are truly well, aren't you?" There was something in that look. It wasn't curiosity, It was something like fear, but I didn't understand what she was afraid of. This persistence sparked a slight unease in me. Everything was fine, so why was she asking? Did she know something? Was she waiting for something? She left that day just before Liam arrived. She stopped at the door, turned, and said in a voice so low I could barely hear, "Don't tell Liam I was here." I said, "All right," and saw her out. Liam arrived shortly after. He opened the door, holding a bouquet of flowers. He had brought me a surprise. I ran to him with joy and threw my arms around his neck. But the moment I embraced him, he collapsed. In an instant, we both hit the floor. I stared at Liam, trying to grasp what was happening. He lay motionless and silent on the cold floor. Panic seized me. I shouted his name. I shook him, but his eyes remained closed. He wasn't responding. I was in total shock. Had he struck his head on something? No, I hadn't seen anything like that. I knelt beside him and checked his breathing. He was breathing, but he was unreachable. I don't know how many minutes passed with my heart hammering against my ribs. Finally, I thought of calling for help and reached for the phone with trembling hands. Just as I began to dial, Liam suddenly screamed, "Clara!" The phone flew from my hand, shattering to pieces against the stone floor. It was a joke. How could anyone play such a trick? I was furious with him that day. He couldn't even look me in the eye out of shame. Eventually, he managed to soothe me and win back my heart. We had dinner, said our evening prayers, and talked. We went to sleep late. In the middle of the night, Liam got up to brush his teeth. Shortly after, I heard a horrific crash from the bathroom. I bolted out of bed and ran. Liam was on the floor in front of the sink again. But this time, it was no joke. Everything was different. He was convulsing, his body out of his control. His eyes were wide open, but they weren't fixed on me. They were locked onto a spot on the wall or in the corner, somewhere I couldn't see. Muffled, unintelligible sounds came from his throat. His twisted thumb seemed to be pointing toward a dark space near the door or some void, but it was impossible to tell. He looked like someone suffering a stroke, but it wasn't a stroke. He was conscious. He was seeing something, and he was terrified of whatever it was. I didn't have the strength to lift him, and he was impossible to restrain. In that desperation, I thought of calling my mother-in-law. Mrs. O'Shea answered on the very first ring, as if she had been sitting by the phone waiting. Her voice sounded even more strained than mine. As soon as I started explaining, she said, "We're coming right now," and hung up. Less than 15 minutes later, the door flew open. My father-in-law and Mrs. O'Shea rushed in. Their faces were ashen, their hands were tightly clasped, and their lips moved incessantly, murmuring protective prayers under their breath. Together, we carried Liam to the living room and laid him on the sofa by the fireplace. Liam's skin had turned a deep, angry red. His eyes were swollen as if they might pop out of their sockets. My mother-in-law was adamantly against calling an ambulance. I insisted, I pleaded, but she wouldn't listen. "We are not going to a hospital," she snapped. My father-in-law just looked at me with a face full of helpless resignation. After a while, the tremors began to subside. Liam's breathing evened out, and his eyes slowly closed. He seemed to be coming back to himself. It was then that Mrs. O'Shea turned to me and began to unravel the dark secrets they had kept buried for years. Liam had been suffering from these seizures since he was a young boy. They would come upon him at intervals, without warning, dragging him into the darkness. They had exhausted every medical avenue. They'd taken him to the finest hospitals in Dublin and even London. Countless tests were run and various treatments were tried. Some seemed to hold the darkness at bay for a while, but it always returned stronger than before. Some doctors called it epilepsy, while others offered different diagnoses, but none could provide a definitive answer. In their desperation, they finally consulted a sin eater, a practitioner of old folk, remedies and prayers. He told them this wasn't a medical ailment, but a binding curse. The family believed him with a fierce, unshakable conviction. They even knew who to blame: Liam's cousin, Siobhan. There had been a history between them, a passionate affair that nearly led to the altar before Liam pulled away at the last moment. Siobhan's family couldn't bear the humiliation. They had turned to the old ways of the countryside. The folk healers claimed a malevolent spirit had been tethered to Liam, and it was this entity that triggered his terrifying episodes. I sat there, frozen as she spoke. I felt hollowed out. My voice was gone. My hands rested limp on my knees as I stared into nothingness. The one truth I deserved to know had been withheld from me. I was learning this only after I had fallen in love, after I had rooted my life into this marriage. This was the reason for the frantic pace of the wedding. They had found a suitable match for Liam and were terrified of losing me. Mrs. O'Shea sobbed as she told the story. My father-in-law kept his face lowered, unable to meet my eyes. A heavy, palpable silence filled the room. broken only by the sound of Liam's strained breathing. Every breath sounded like a struggle, as if he were growing exhausted just by existing. I remembered the first weeks of our marriage, Mrs. O'Shea's persistent questions. Is everything all right? Is there any trouble? They hadn't been traps. They had been prayers, a desperate hope that maybe this time it won't happen, or maybe this girl is the cure. And I had walked blindly into that hope, straight across the threshold of a nightmare. A massive wave of anger rose within me, but it wasn't directed at Liam. What I felt for him hadn't changed. I just felt betrayed, drawn into a situation by the decisions of others, left completely in the dark. My in-laws stayed with us that night. The next morning, when Liam opened his eyes, I was the first thing he looked for. He was consumed by shame. "I'm sorry," he whispered over and over. "Tell me," I said firmly. "I want to hear everything from you." And so, he began to tell me everything from the beginning, including the things he saw during those dark hours. As Liam spoke, his voice shifted. It grew thin, then trembled, breaking at the edges as he described how many of them there were, their distorted forms, and how they tried to suffocate him. He had carried the secret of where he was, being pulled during those dark seizures and the reason for the inexplicable aches in his body all alone for years. He had told no one, knowing that if he did, he'd be marked as a madman. When he confessed that his parents had demanded he keep the truth from me, I felt the crushing weight on his shoulders. "They want something from me, Clara," he said. "At times I don't fully understand what it is, but they don't want me to leave." "Leave to go where?" I asked. He fell silent, staring out at the mist-covered window. "They want me to stay here with them, not in another place." What I heard shook me to my core. I felt a profound sorrow for my husband. These shadows had been consuming him piece by piece over the years. Yet, despite everything, Liam lived, worked, and kept a smile on his face. No one knew the war raging inside him. I couldn't abandon him. I researched renowned psychiatrists and took him to see them. Previous medication cycles had been tried, but this time we sought a different approach. Liam began to stabilize and the seizures became less frequent. But those entities hadn't left. They had merely retreated into the wings. Intermittently, noises were heard by the door, in the bathroom mirror, or in the darkened corners of the house. Occasionally, a shadow would dart past. It felt as though the house belonged to them, and we were merely intruders in their territory. Sometimes, even without seeing them, I felt their presence. A heavy weight would settle on my chest the moment I entered a room, and my breathing would grow ragged. I stopped eating during that period. Every morning, I woke with a gnawing nausea. When my mother called, I told her I was fine, but I could feel my voice trembling. At one point, she said, "Clara, you aren't well. Come stay with us for a while." I didn't go. How could I leave Liam alone with them? About 2 weeks passed, and then I saw them too. I was standing exactly where Liam had collapsed that night, by the sink, near the threshold. There, on the floor in that very spot, were 2 or 3 dense, pitch-black silhouettes. They were misshapen. They had hands, feet, even faces, but they were not human. I cannot describe them properly. I couldn't liken them to anything I'd ever seen. Things that took the form of a human, but possessed no humanity. Even this description falls short. To see them is one thing. Words simply cannot capture that sight. I froze. I couldn't move. My voice failed me and my knees shook. I began to recite every ancient prayer I knew in my mind. My lips moved, but no sound came out. I just prayed and prayed internally. They stood there still. It was as if they were waiting to see what I would do, as if they were accustomed to this. It felt like they had performed this scene many times before, perhaps starting years ago with Liam. One would stand still. They would wait, and then they would approach. One of them stepped forward. The others remained in the shadows. This one came very close. I couldn't look at its face. I tried, but my eyes refused. It was as if looking would trigger something irreversible. And then it spoke. "Leave him. He belongs to another." It was referring to the void behind it, to Liam. "He is not yours," it said. There was neither pity nor malice in its voice. It spoke as if stating a cold, indisputable fact. But because I am a woman who had just built a home, something burned beneath that coldness. Rage. I began to pray with fury, no longer trembling. My voice grew audible in my mind, and then they were gone. Liam found me standing by the sink threshold, petrified. He took my hand and asked, "What happened?" I told him. His face went pale. He looked at me in silence for a long time. "The same things," he finally whispered. "I see them exactly like that." That night, we held each other and wept for a long time. Without words, we just cried. From that day on, life became a living nightmare. The entities no longer hid. They prowled through the house. There were noises in the night. Sometimes Liam would sit up suddenly in his sleep, eyes wide open but his consciousness gone, staring at a single point. In those moments, I couldn't bear to look at his face. It looked like Liam's face, yet it didn't. It was as if something else was wearing him. Days bled into one another. I became a prisoner in my own home. I couldn't go to the convent anymore. Even opening the door to step outside felt like an impossible distance. My students called to check on me. "I'm fine, just a bit under the weather," I lied. What else could I say? And every morning, Liam would head off to work, carrying that invisible shadow with him. Every morning, Liam would put on his suit and head to work. To this day, I don't understand how he managed it. No one in his professional life had a clue about the storm inside him, and he wanted to keep it that way. When he returned in the evening, his face was often different. Sometimes he'd say, "It went well today." Other times, he wouldn't speak at all, heading straight to the bedroom like a hollow shell. The thing I felt most during that time was a profound loneliness. I was married, yet I was utterly alone. There was someone beside me, but he was fighting a private war within himself, just as I was fighting mine. We both wanted to reach out, to help each other, but our hands were tied by our own struggles. Every night before bed, I said my prayers and recited my protective verses. I left the bedroom door open. When it was closed, the room felt stifling, as if the oxygen had been sucked out, leaving a heavy, suffocating void. Liam's seizures flared up again. The medications were no longer enough. With every episode, I was haunted by the image of that twisted thumb and those guttural, meaningless sounds. For a full year, we knocked on every door and tried every path. Some called it neurological, some psychological. Others spoke of ancient curses. Everyone had a different answer, but none of them were complete. Finally, a trusted elder in the community listened to us, pondered in silence, and then said, "Leave this house." That was when I learned the whole truth. Liam had lived in that stone house with his cousin, Siobhan, before. They had spent months there together. There had even been talk of a hand fasting ceremony, a spiritual union between them. There was a past embedded in those walls, and that past had never moved out. It was soaked into the corners, the plaster, the very air. The place we lived in carried a burden, and we were trying to live our daily lives right in the center of that weight. We packed our things and moved to a new house. I will never forget that day. When I placed the last box in the car and closed the door of that building, I felt like I was truly breathing for the first time in ages. My lungs filled completely. The pressure on my chest lifted. Liam sat beside me, staring out the window as the car moved. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. We were both feeling the same thing. But as I took my first step into the new house, a shiver ran down my spine. It wasn't a good shiver. It was the chill of uncertainty. I kept asking myself, will it be the same here? Throughout this entire process, a part of me feared that a simple change of scenery wouldn't be enough to escape what followed us. I wondered, was I finally led to peace? That first night in the new house, I prayed for a long time, and this time I truly meant it. Thy will be done, Lord. Make this place a sanctuary for us. The first week was silent. The second week followed suit. There were no muffled voices, no shadows waiting like ink stains in the corners. I was no longer afraid to walk to the sink in the dead of night. I only realized what a profound blessing that simple freedom was after it had been stolen from me. At the end of the third week, Liam woke up on one of those quiet mornings and, looking me in the eye, said, "I slept well," just those 3 words. But to me, they were the most beautiful sentence I had ever heard. Our consultations with the doctors continued, and Liam stayed faithful to his treatment. Slowly, his spirit seemed to inhabit his body again. The seizures didn't vanish entirely, but they grew infrequent and their violence withered. Those entities did not follow us to the new house. Once or twice shortly after the move, I felt a familiar heaviness, like a cold gaze from a distant hill, but it never took form. They retreated as if respecting a boundary we had finally drawn. My mother visited every week, treating Liam with immense kindness. My father never asked about the details of what we endured, but his silent presence was enough. Mrs. O'Shea continued to call on us too. At first, opening the door for her was difficult. My heart was a mess of resentment and pity. But as the years passed, that feeling settled. She wasn't malicious. She had made a grave mistake, yes, but she was only trying to shield her breaking son. Perhaps when I am a mother myself, I will understand that desperation. 3 years have passed since then. Liam still has difficult nights. Exhaustion or stress sometimes stirs the old embers. But that all-consuming darkness, the bone-chilling cold that greeted us at the door, is gone. We are stronger now and far more bonded. Sometimes it isn't the happy days that knit souls together, but the heavy burdens carried together. Since that morning when Liam told me everything, no wall has stood between us. There are no secrets left. Yet on certain nights, one question still tightens my chest. Had they told me everything from the start, what would I have done? Would I have walked away? In all honesty, I don't know. Perhaps that is exactly why they remain silent. But this much I know for certain. Every soul has the right to know the wounds of the one they are about to wed. No matter how much it terrifies or unnerves you, anything you think you are protecting by hiding it in the dark only grows in silence, becoming far more dangerous over time. Secrecy does not protect. Secrecy nourishes and expands. I am calling out to anyone reading this who finds themselves in a similar situation, or who carries the question in their heart, should I walk this path? Listen to that whisper. Most of the time, that voice points in the truest direction. I heard it too, but I lost it in the roar of that hurried momentum amidst the noise of rushing footsteps. I pray that you make a clearer decision than I did, and I have learned this, saying, let it be if it is meant to be. In your prayers is the greatest spiritual generosity. We only see the present. God knows what that desire truly signifies for the future. I left that phrase outside the door. I simply said, let it happen. I wanted it, so I demanded it. I did not open my heart with true surrender. Perhaps that is why I had to walk this arduous path. But perhaps for that very reason, I am living a much deeper, much more authentic life today. I could not have reached this dawn without facing those shadows. I could not have known this strength within me without carrying that heavy burden. To everyone entering this journey, when you entrust yourself to a higher power, do not keep your hands clenched tight. The tighter you hold on to something, the more it ceases to be yours and becomes a shackle. The most beautiful prayer is to open your heart wide and say, let the best outcome prevail. The rest is no longer in human hands, but in the hands of fate. Finally, let me add this. There are many details I have left untold. The chilling specifics of those nights, those shapeless voices, the steps we took with our spiritual guide, and how the matter with Siobhan was eventually resolved. I may tell those parts one day, but for now, this is as much weight as can be carried. Some secrets wait for their own time to meet the light. Thank you for giving your time to this story. If you are also within a similar darkness, please do not carry this burden alone. Burdens carried in solitude feel much heavier and slowly consume a person from within. Asking for support is not weakness. On the contrary, the greatest courage begins at that very threshold. May God protect us all. Until we meet in the next story, stay in peace.